This is the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm Aaron Dykes.
And I'm Melissa Melton. Agenda 21 is not a conspiracy theory. And while it may seem harmless or even helpful on the surface, it is a UN-inspired, banker-funded scheme to institute a global government from the ground up. Right here, right now, our country is being taken over in the name of sustainable development.
Local environmental groups are meeting in towns across America backed by big federal grant money, but behind that, entities like the Rockefeller Foundation. Their sustainable community meetings are not only a takeover, but a buy-in to a planned society controlled by a psychopathic elite, all sold with a smile. So to find out more, we decided to investigate some of those local meetings taking place in Texas to find out about the dark deception behind this Agenda 21 scheme.
They had growth on them so quickly and so heavily they didn't have time to plan.
What is sustainable development?
The conservation of energy resources.
People that live there maybe don't have to drive as much.
Concentrated and balanced growth.
Concentrated and balanced growth.
And the kind of growth you want to see.
To help you achieve the vision.
Higher density mixed-use development in the center of town.
How compact or not is it creating this much more interconnected grid?
Growth here is more balanced.
Housing and jobs balance with the stakeholder committee's participation in line with the Sustainable Places Project.
The Housing and Urban Development Department of the United States awarded Sustainable Communities Regional Planning grants to Texas, giving $3.7 million to the Capital Area Council of Governments in a project that spanned Austin, Texas, as well as neighboring rural communities that include Elgin, Lockhart, Hutto, and Dripping Springs. The grant specifies guidelines for energy use and climate change mitigation, as well as the integration of smart housing, nearby job sectors, and integrated transportation systems. The members of the project we spoke with in Elgin were apparently unaware of HUD's related agenda to the larger Agenda 21 program.
Agenda what?
Agenda 21.
What's the number stand for?
21st century.
And what does that mean?
Well, I'm not familiar with it at all, so I couldn't comment on that. So I'm not sure what their criteria or their outline is on that.
Respectfully, there is no national treaty that obligates local governments to follow Agenda 21. That just doesn't exist. That's a myth.
We're promoting sustainable, responsible development. But it's nothing to do with the United Nations. I mean, you know, if that's just paranoia. I'm sorry.
In fact, there is an international agenda at work. Austin is a model city for the ICLEI. The NGO partnered with the United Nations to push for local Agenda 21 implementation. In the name of sustainability, they've taken on some of the most ambitious carbon cuts in the entire nation and are a model for energy conservation and zero waste. And unelected regional boards are drawing the rest of Central Texas into this international scheme, all in the name of sustainability. Among other groups, Smart Growth America and the ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability USA group specifically congratulated the cities and towns receiving these HUD grants for sustainable communities and regional planning. So it is absurd to claim that there is no international agenda interacting with these local communities as they attempt to implement sustainable development goals.
Well, I know a lot about Agenda 21, and I don't have any concerns because I don't think this project is driven by the international community or even by the national community. I think it's driven by Elgin, Texas.
Except it's been implemented nationally under treaty, and these grants are coming from the federal level. I think it's really dishonest not to admit there's an Agenda 21 motive.
Sustainability is just about letting local communities decide for themselves.
We had heard so much about what Agenda 21 wasn't, we decided to interview a professor that teaches it. This is Dean Almy, an associate professor and director of graduate programs in urban design and landscape architecture at the University of Texas.
Now in Texas, Texas Triangle is one of the 10 identified megaregions of the United States. And the projections, which were pretty much just confirmed by the recent census data that was released, are that populations in the Texas Triangle will double in the next 20 to 30 years. And one of the big problems, of course, is that it starts to create new towns, new communities, but are they really communities? Are they really towns when they're all sort of evolving in a really short time.
He teaches Agenda 21 courses at the university.
So the course I teach, which I call Agenda 21, really deals with the question of sustainable urbanism. How do we begin to sort of build the city more sustainably moving forward?
What is Agenda 21, kind of a brief overview, and why you feel that it's an important plan?
Well, it was a resolution of the United Nations where a number of countries got together, ostensibly in Rio, also called the Rio Declaration, to begin to look at the way in which humans were occupying the world, the state of the world, the state of civilization in the world, how we were using resources, whether the consumption of resources and global development was being achieved ecologically and equitably.
And when recently asked about the UN's plan by a San Antonio-based news station, he was quoted as saying, "It's changing the status quo of how we operate as a country that is developing, and so it's threatening to some people. Urban design by its nature is about the collective good, and isn't necessarily about the freedom of any one person to do whatever the hell they want." So I was going to ask you if you wanted to talk about that quote a little bit.
Well, I mean, already, you know, if we're looking for code words, okay, so already in that quote is the term collective, which, you know, a conspiracy theorist could somehow associate with, you know, I don't know, the Soviet Union. Right? And that's not the intent. You know, collective just means us together as a society. So yeah, I kind of stand behind that, actually. Cities are not individual constructs built by single people. Cities are collective constructs where we all live together, and we have to balance the needs of individuals and the needs of collective society. And cities, by their very nature, would be very difficult to construct and manage and develop if they were all sort of politically anarchic.
Agenda 21's Sustainable Development Visioning meetings rely on the Delphi technique, a manipulation tactic wherein a facilitator ensures a public forum goes as planned with the predetermined outcome already decided upon by those who ultimately called the meeting. The Delphi technique was created by the Rand Corporation in the 1950s for the U.S. Department of Defense to use as a psychological weapon during the Cold War. While community feedback is encouraged, the final outcome is driven by leading questions and preset answers. These same exact strategies were outlined in detail in the local Agenda 21 handbook. We saw this at both sustainable development meetings we attended. No matter what answer a community member chose, it all fed into the Agenda 21 plan already underway. The project planners admitted they weren't working with a blank slate, but were instead following a plan already mapped out by so-called stakeholders.
What we want to be really clear about is that we're not starting from sort of an empty slate. Your community has done a lot of work in setting in place lots of plans and policies like the comprehensive plan.
We're planners. We've been involved in projects mostly in central Austin and around that area. We worked on the Miller redevelopment for many years, and we're still working on it. The downtown Austin plan. We're working on several master plan communities around the region. A lot of focus on urban infill and redevelopment.
And have you ever heard of Agenda 21?
Yes, but just recently.
Is this a part of that plan?
No.
Is it affiliated in any way?
No.
The reason I ask is because you use a lot of the same terminology, visioning workshops and sustainable development, and a lot of that falls under that plan, and I just didn't know.
Well, that is very traditional planning talk from the last probably 30 years. So we always talk about, having a vision. What is the general big picture vision?
But there's a larger agenda going on. I mean, this is a regional development. It didn't start here in Elgin. These proposals didn't originate here in Elgin. They're being done in other cities.
I think these proposals did originate here in Elgin.
Why are all these plans springing up all at once at the same exact time, all over the country, all over every city, though, if it's not a coordinated effort?
Well, I don't want to be contentious with you. I would just say that I think that's a myth. They're not springing up all over the country. In this whole region, there's 4 cities looking at it.
In fact, these sustainable communities were popping up in nearly every major metro area across the country, all funded by HUD. And these sustainable communities are pursuing the international agenda under President Obama's Partnership for Sustainable Communities, joining together the policies and regulations of housing and urban development, the Department of Traffic, and the EPA.
I actually went to my first sustainable development meeting last week. They received a federal grant from Obama's Partnership for Sustainable Communities.